Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. Today I want to talk about my wish for data privacy, and I call it the data privacy makeover. So there are 6 items that I think about and I talk about a lot about what I wish would happen in the U.S. with privacy. I think we're in need of a redo or a makeover, as I like to say, around data privacy. So here are kind of my 6 wish list items that I wanted to throw out, and feel free to comment on my wish list. So the first is to have the data breach notification laws in the U.S. harmonized on a federal level. Currently, every state has data breach notification laws. They're different in every state, so they're different in terms of what they define as a data breach, what is personal data, what are the reporting requirements, what are some of the fines. So I think for me, I consider that low-hanging fruit for the federal government to come in and help the states to be able to come together and harmonize that on a federal level, even if they keep the, let's say, private right of action or whatever the fines will be. That could be determined on a state-by-state basis if needed. My second one is to close the loophole in the third-party doctrine. So the third-party doctrine says that data that an individual gives to a third party doesn't have the same rights. So for example, let's say you have a document that's in your house, you may have a right, Fourth Amendment right to unreasonable search and seizure, against unreasonable search and seizure, but if that data is held by a third party, those same rights do not apply. So for me, I think that's a loophole that definitely should be closed, especially as things like the third party doctrine were developing at a time when computing or computers or data was not disseminated in the same way. I think that we should create a federal agency related to data privacy that's human focused. So obviously the FTC is very strong in enforcement around consumer privacy rights, but I think we need a broader agency that deals with privacy on their own. We're seeing that pop up in places like China, believe it or not, the EU, South America, Canada. Most of these countries have dedicated agencies to privacy, and then also to have a human focus. So although the FTC, as I said, is focused on the consumer part of privacy with businesses, I think that not every human is a consumer. So having an agency that deals with it on a broader basis would be great. I think we need to create a board of people whose job it is to work proactively on privacy, whether it be to educate legislature folks, be able to create recommendations for laws and regulations, and just be able to do the proactive, so not just the reactive, but the proactive part of privacy. I think the Privacy Shield, which was invalidated, that has not yet come into a formal new agreement. I think the U.S. and the EU proposed a new transatlantic agreement that hasn't yet been fully finalized, but I think we need to replace those types of agreements with 2 different agreements. One should be between the U.S. and the EU, almost like the mutual legal assistance agreements, where the governments in a situation, let's say a terror investigation or some criminal investigation, can negotiate amongst themselves about how data in those investigations should be handled, and especially if they have to contact certain businesses or individuals for information, those individuals don't have to be afraid that they're going to be penalized by their governments as a result of that disclosure. Also, I think that there should be a separate agreement for businesses that handle data, that are doing these transatlantic data transfers, because a company can't stop, for example, the FBI from busting into their company to take documents. So, making that agreement something that is in the control of a business, what they can actually control, I think would be maybe a good way forward. And then also, probably my biggest one that I always talk about is making privacy a fundamental constitutional right. So currently, privacy isn't a constitutional right. We're seeing that a lot, especially as the fallout from the Dobbs decision, and people understanding that, there are some gaps there in terms of what privacy rights mean to individuals, and that would mean a lot to me, and I think to people, because they would have fundamental privacy rights. So we're seeing places like, definitely the EU has had privacy as a fundamental human right in their constitution since the 1950s. India, a few years ago, instituted that within the last year or so. I think Brazil may have done that as well. I think privacy is a fundamental human right in Canada as well. So that's something I would definitely like to see. So that's my wish list. That's my data privacy makeover, and I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you. Bye.